Can you hear me? Yes, I think so. Dave has asked me to say a few things about Wild Bill Davidson, because in 1989 I organised the last tour of the UK, Bill's last appearances over here, and maybe his last recordings as well, because we took portable recording equipment along with us. I just happened to have one CD left down there, and so I met Bill in 1983. He came to a gig that we were doing in Harlow, and it's like playing with one of your idols. When I started listening to jazz, some of the records that I heard first were the Wild Bill Davidson, Sidney Bechet, Art Hodes recordings on the Blue Note label, and I grew up listening to these, so to get the opportunity of playing with Wild Bill was an amazing experience. That was 1983. 86 I did a recording, 2 sessions with him in London, one at the Pizza Express at Dean Street and one in Buckinghamshire at John R.T. Davies' house. But Bill's lip by then was not in good shape. He was a heavy drinker, and he had suffered from bleeding ulcers and that sort of thing. And he just, although the sound was there, the power had gone. Those wonderful sessions that Alan was talking about in the 1940s, the Commodore label, and with Condon in the 50s, he still had the sound but not the power. A couple of years later, I did a gig with him at somewhere down in Buckinghamshire, and he brought his wife Annie along on the tours with him. Annie was his minder, and she was a colourful character. She'd been a 20th century Fox starlet, and she was his 5th wife. Bill used to marry Mexican women for money so that they could come over the border and get American citizenship. Well, that might be one of the reasons why he was known as Wild Bill. Anyway, he met Annie Stewart, and she became wife number 5, and she gave up her film career. She's a wonderful, very, very good-looking woman with a bright prospect in the cinema back in the 40s. She gave all this lot up to look after Wild Bill, and her card that she gave out to everyone had on it, Anne Davidson, slave. And they behaved like Laurel and Hardy. So they were always, she said, we are known as the Bickersons. And that was quite true. We were in the tour, 1988, Anne had said, Bill would like to play the Cork Festival. Well, I played the Cork Festival the year before. So I got on to the organiser and said, I can bring Wild Bill Davidson and Art Hodes and get them together again. Art was a wonderful blues piano player, and he was responsible for the recordings with Bechet in the 40s because he was the artist and repertoire manager of Blue Note Records. So I got Art together and Bill, and we did the Cork Festival to a crowded opera house in 1988. And the band played beautifully, and I said it'd be a lovely idea to come back and do this properly and do a tour, because at that time both Art and Bill were coming over and playing with all and sundry at jazz clubs with local rhythm sections and that sort of thing. So they didn't get the opportunity of working with a regular lineup. So they agreed to do it, and I started to get on the phone and phone the Civic Theatre venues, and they'd never heard of Wild Bill Davidson or Art Hodes. So that was the first snag. The second snag was that both men were in their 80s. Bill was 83 and Art was 85. So would they still be alive in 6 months' time? Yeah, well. So anyway, I had to think of a unique selling point, and then I remembered that both of them had played for Al Capone in Chicago during the 20s, and that's how we sold the tour. It was, we called it the Legends of American Dixieland, and we had Jackie Free still playing at the age of 86 on trombone with us on some of the dates, and Campbell Burnap, the late Campbell Burnap, did the rest of the dates. And we started the tour in May 1989, so that's just over 30 years ago, and we played 11 dates, including 2 in Northern Ireland, and Art brought his wife Jan with him, and Bill brought Annie with him, and we had this big long wheelbase transit minibus and drove up and down the country in that, doing these gigs. And being in the bandwagon with these 2 old timers was an experience in itself, because there were all sorts of stories going on. As I say, Bill and Annie were always bickering at each other. And I can remember, and Keith will remember this, we were in Northern Ireland being driven to Enniskillen, and Bill saw a solitary cow in a field, and he waved at it, he said, "Hi, Annie." And she said, "Wilhelm." Whenever she was annoyed with Bill, she used to call him Wilhelm. I never heard him called Bill at all in that 2 weeks. And we were on the road going down to, I think, Worthing Pavilion, and Jan Hodies mentioned to Art that it was Mother's Day, and Anne turned to Bill and said, "You hear that, Wilhelm? It's Mother's Day and you haven't got me anything." And he said, "Well, you're not my goddamn mother, Anne." She said, "I act like your mother." He said, "You certainly are a mother." That was Bill. And with all sorts of things. And the 2 old boys, I mean, it was a great experience. They were very, very different characters. With Bill, what you saw is what you got. You know, he was quite a fairly simple character. Very fine player, great jazzer, very emotional player. Art Hodies was an intellectual. He'd been a writer and a broadcaster and all of these things. So they were very different in temperament. And they got on very well together, except on the last but one date. And we were playing at Oxford, and the next night we were playing at Green Lawns Hotel in Falmouth. So it was a hell of a long journey down. And I'd laid on a fast car to get the 2 of them down to the Devon-Somerset border into their hotel. The rest of us would carry on in the minibus. And we used to start off the show with Hindustan. And Art would bring it in on the piano. And on this particular night, Art brought it in slightly faster than normal. And Bill missed the first note. And he turned around and he glared at Art Hodies. And he said, "Goddamn piano player's trying to kill me." And Art refused to go in the car with Bill. So I went in the car with Bill and Anne, and Art went in the minibus. And I said to Anne, I said, "I think Bill's upset Art." And she said, "You hear that, Wilhelm? You've upset Art and he's a sick old man." And he says, "Yeah, sick in the goddamn brain. Besides which, he's a goddamn communist." I was intrigued. So I said, "Well, why do you think that, Bill?" He said, "Well, he booked me for a parade in 1941 for the goddamn Reds, and I haven't forgiven him yet." So he'd nursed this grudge for 40 odd years. That was Wild Bill Davidson and Art Hodies. The tour was an experience. And Jim will say, because Jim worked with Bill when Bill was a lot younger with the Alex Welsh Band, and they recorded together and toured together. 3 tours, yeah. And Jim's got some shellacs. Are they shellacs? Oh no, not quite shellacs. Some vinyls there with Wild Bill. He was a phenomenal player, you know, wonderful player. There's a session that he did in 1950. This was the time when the big bands had finished, and the great drummer Gene Krupa had fallen on hard times. He got this Chicago-style band together, and Wild Bill was in it. And to make the records commercial, they hired this awful singer, country singer called Bobby Soots, and he was a singing cowboy. And they made this record called The Bonaparte's Retreat. and it really is corny. And then as soon as he stops singing, Bill's cornet just sort of grabs hold of it, and the whole thing just lights up. Well, I had Bill at my house in Harlow, where I lived in those days, and I played him this record, and he hadn't heard it since 1951. And he said, I sure as hell remember that goddamn singer. So, you know, it was just a great experience. So that was May '89 when we did that tour. He flew off to Japan after that, and then he became ill, had a heart attack, and he passed away on November the 14th in 1989, which coincidentally was also Art Hody's birthday. So that was the tie-up with the legends of American Dixieland. If you haven't got any Wild Bill Davison recordings, do yourself a favour and get them. Look for the ones on Commodore from the 1940s, where he's recorded with Pee Wee Russell, the great George Wetling, with George Brunies on trombone, and all these wonderful musicians. And Ed Hall's on some of them as well, yeah. So they're really worth listening to. There's also a mild Bill. When I said to him, what record is your best record? Pretty Wild. He did an album with Percy Faith Orchestra in the 50s, Wild Bill with strings, and you get Wild Bill playing wonderful ballads. So there was this sort of it was always a sort of a sour sound to his cornet. And the guy that gets closest to these days is our dear old chum over there, Alan Beachy, ladies and gentlemen. He captures the sound very, very nicely. And I'm going to hand it back to him now. Oh, yeah.
I won't take up your time very much because you're here to hear the music, but I must tell you a story about when I was on the road with Alex Welch and Wild Bill, and we were in Stourbridge, and we were staying the night in the same hotel we were playing in, which meant that we were in the bar well after closing time. And I happened to have the room next door to Wild Bill in the hotel. So I went to bed early, being a good boy, of course. And I'm lying in bed, and suddenly I heard this thump, a door banging, and this crash coming from Wild Bill's room. So I thought, God, what's happened? So I rushed in, and fortunately he'd left the door ajar. And I went in, and he's sitting on the floor, still got his shirt and tie and jacket on, but he's been trying to take his trousers off. And they're caught around the soles of his feet because he's still got his braces on. And he was rocking to and fro, trying to get these trousers off. So I eradicated the braces and managed to get him out. And he said, just a minute, he said, I got something for you. I've been going to give you this for a time. He said, and he emptied a brief, what do you call these, duffel bags, and about 1,000 teaspoons fell out. It was a little bit kleptomaniac. And at the bottom of all this pile of teaspoons was one of these multi-opener things with a corkscrew, a bottle opener, and the usual thing. And he said, I've been meaning to give you this for ages. He said, it'll help you get through life.
All right, we're going to play you a song that was a bit of a hit for Benny Goodman, and Bill covered this in the 1940s on Commodore Records, and recorded it several times afterwards. I think he recorded it on a TV chat show in 1984 in America. I don't know if it was Johnny Carson or something like that. Anyways, called On the Alamo.